Namaste and good evening, everyone. Namaste, Sraddhalu.
Namaste and welcome to everybody.
We're happy to continue today. One more series on the current affairs, and today we will take some comments and questions from our viewers about India in particular. You may post your questions on this theme in the chat box or address other questions at our email ID integralstudies.in@gmail.com. So we will read one first comment from BGeese24. So it seems like a divine intervention to ensure Modi did not win with a great majority.
Yes. This is in continuation of our discussion last time, where I was elaborating on the toolkit used during the election campaign and all the indicators that the entire election was being influenced heavily by every means possible. One of the means was, of course, through social media. One of the letters which we have received was, or perhaps it is in the comments on the video, somebody describes how just before elections they received this overwhelming messaging which was anti-Modi, anti-BJP and pro-Congress, pro-opposition, etc. and enough to overwhelm you. So this was one of the most powerful means used, and it's completely silent, it's completely undetectable, because the feed given to each mobile phone, to each person, is private. There is no way for any entity, government or private or otherwise, to monitor how the bias is actually operating in the way people are being influenced. So this was part of the discussion we had last time, but as I pointed out, the entire toolkit was not activated because this had worked. The media and other manipulations had worked, and the kind of revolt that you saw in Bangladesh, organized revolt, was not necessary. Most importantly, the majority that the BJP had been weakened enough that they had to be in a coalition, and now through coalition influences, all government policies could be compromised. As you can see, only in the last 10 days or 2 weeks, two major bills that the government tried to bring forward have had to be withdrawn. And this is because of the coalition politics, because the partners do not want it or will actually drop the government, support to the government if the bills are taken up. And this is now very easy to manipulate, and so there is no need for a complete overthrow with civil unrest, because that is much more difficult to manage. And so even for the cabal, it's something they keep as a last resort, as in Bangladesh. But BG's comment is actually a complete misunderstanding or a misreading of the discussion. Remember, I said it was the manipulation which led to the setback, although the BJP still won, and by a significant margin. But to say that it is divine intervention that ensured more, there was partial success. The partial success ensured that the full attack was not required. And that's how we have to understand it. From the perspective of the divine, the work has had a setback. And I'm going to elaborate upon this further towards the end with certain observations that the mother made in a different context, but which applies here. So we go to the next question.
I have a question from Baivav. I've recently showed the podcast of Swami Subramayam, who was claiming that China took Indian land and our PM, Sir Narendra Modi, isn't doing anything to get it. You've also talked about Arunachal Pradesh. The MOU is signed in 2008 and at the time of the Congress government. So we've lost ample of parts of Arunachal Pradesh. That's the question of Vaibhav. Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm sorry I've had problems today with the computer as well as the internet, and I just had to reconnect the internet. I hope things will go through
It's
now.
working. Yes, yes.
Okay,
So,
yes, I'm sorry about
so
this.
I just read Vaibhav
Yes,
question.
so Vaibhav's question about Subramaniam Swamy has made a lot of charges against Narendra Modi, and you will see on his Twitter feed regularly he is attacking Modi in every way possible. But what is interesting is, unlike the opposition, which attacks Modi with false accusations, because at the end of the day they could not meet any of his achievements, even during their 70 years, and now everything he has done they cannot. They have to avoid by attacking him on things which are either outright wrong or secondary. Subramaniam Swamy attacks Modi on grounds that he is not doing enough, particularly not doing enough to protect the Hindu values and the Hindu base of the BJP. Largely it is in that direction. Most of the attacks also are about not doing enough to protect India's interests. So I'm very happy with those attacks, in the sense that it's necessary to keep the BJP government on its toes. Because otherwise, when you're too powerful, one tends to have not enough criticism, which could be constructive ideally. Swami's criticism is not quite constructive, but on the other hand, it is still in the right direction. So I don't have too much to say about that, except that he muddies the waters by making accusations sometimes which are unnecessary, and creating doubt about Modi's intentions. The issue is not about intentions, as we have already seen before. The issue is about capability, sometimes competence of team, and sometimes pressures used against. For example, the two bills which were recently withdrawn were because of coalition pressure. Now, you can say Modi should have done this or that, perhaps. But being on the seat, there are aspects which we do not fully appreciate, or even if we appreciate, we have to also recognize the man or the party may be under pressures which tap into his limitations. Because nowhere shall we assume that he is perfect or that he can do everything correctly. He also makes mistakes, will make mistakes, but also he has weaknesses and limitations. So I don't know what the circumstances are, but I'm putting this in context. He's not a perfect man. He may not be someone you like. Irrelevant. The point is, to the best of his current capacity, he is doing what he can to protect India's interests and the civilizational values. Not enough, perhaps, and I have myself many criticisms, but for doing not enough. I want to give another example. Just before the BJP came to power, and this would be, let's say, around 2000, mid 2000, let's say, they had lost, they came to power, etc. They had criticized the Congress government for keeping certain documents secret. And these documents had to do with the Chinese invasion in India in the 1960s, which the Chinese had also gone back. So when the BJP came to power, they had said first thing they would do is make those documents public. When they came to power, they did not do it. Now this to me is a red flag with anybody else. For example, Kejriwal said he would expose the Congress corruption for the Commonwealth Games. When he came to power, he said, well, show me evidence and I will act. But he himself wouldn't do anything, although the evidence was already there. That's a red flag. So in the BJP's case, for me it was a red flag. And fortunately, I had a few friends who had friends within the system. So I said, listen, I need to get this information. Why are they holding back? And I got the information. So I'm saying this. Remember, it's not an official statement from any government agency, and I could be wrong. So let this not be used against the Indian interests. But the information I was given specifically was that in that particular document, from the Indian Army communications during the war, there were references to certain territories of India as belonging to China. And so if that had been made public, the Chinese would have used it to justify annexation of territories. Now, it could have been a simple error, it could have been a mistake on the part of the army people during their communications, but the point was, it was in national interest not to make it public. And there was no way to say the reasons in public. So I give this as an example of how often there are compulsions internal, which could be complex. So coming back to the lands, where China has recently annexed certain lands in Arunachal Pradesh, there has been this accusation which Dr. Swami has made. But Modi also made statements that they were able to push back and take back the land. At this point, Swami says the lands are still with China. Modi says they are not. I don't know. Are these accusations correct? I don't know. But I don't believe Modi can be compromised that easily on this issue. It's also possible that there were certain lands where the lines were never demarcated, and that certain territorial boundaries have shifted within those spaces. And large parts of those are desert in the mountains. And so it's often difficult even to maintain or to police those lines, because how long can you have people walking 24 hours in single file? You can't do that really. So you have little groups moving around. And if you put markers and the Chinese move the markers in the middle of desert, how do you even know that the marker is moved? So it is a complex situation. And even if it moves, what do you do? Will you start a war because a territory of desert has been, let's say, annexed? And the Indian army can lead it, also push back those markers. End of the day, it's a no-win game, and the Chinese know it also. So from their point, the goal is only to irritate India. There is this strategy which is discussed by the Chinese Communist Party, where they openly speak of this as death by 1,000 cuts. So the goal is to irritate in 1,000 different directions and bleed India. And this is one of those areas. So perhaps there is a boundary. Perhaps the Chinese have come in. Perhaps the Indian army has pushed back. Perhaps there's a back and forth happening every few weeks. I don't know. But on this matter, at least, Swami's criticism of Modi government, and it's not just Modi, it's the government finally, and the army, would not be correct. We have not, as far as I understand, lost any significant parts of Arunachal Pradesh. We can go to the next question.
One question from Sudhir. Is Dr. Subramanian Swami compromised? He always seemed to spew venom against Mr. Modi. In this DH article, Dr. Swami is talking about Modi's removal. In a YouTube video, he labeled Modi as corrupt and claimed that to be the reason for not prosecuting some political opponents.
Yes. I've shared this example earlier when first it was in the Vajpayee government. They had just come to power. And at that time, all the evidence of the Bofors case was already available in public, of the corruption of Sonia Gandhi, Rajiv Gandhi, the first family of the Congress party, which considers the family more important than the nation. And the evidence was already in public. And after they had come to power, I asked somebody who had access to the system. I said, well, why don't they prosecute? It's so obvious. Finish the game. Finish that opposition once and for all. And at the very least, the Congress party will rejuvenate with a new set of leadership. And the person, I mentioned this perhaps before, he said, Sraddhalu ji, you don't understand how politics works. In politics, you never defeat your enemy. You use the information you have against him to control. I completely disagreed with that approach. I can understand that this is the way in politics. For example, the point they would use, and this is used both sides, in every state, in every country, between the government party and the opposition party, they have some negative data against the other, and they will use that as a pressure point to get the acquiescence of the other party to back one of your bills. Now this you see in Tamil Nadu, for example, where parties keep switching and they are all in it together. All sides are corrupt. Each has information against the other, and they threaten, they leak out something, cover it up, etc. BJP was supposed to be different. They were supposed to be a party which is clean and non-corrupt. And as far as I'm aware, after Modi came to power, at least it has been. But before Modi, when Vajpayee government was in place, it had many people, and even Vajpayee himself, although good in intention, was open to blackmail. And there were many elements of his personal life which were not very healthy, those of you who may know it. He was open to blackmail, and perhaps pressure points were used. He was weak. He was incapable of taking a strong position under pressure, especially under public pressure and so on. Modi is different, and I believe it is not the case anymore. But there is this issue which is complex, that sometimes in the play of politics, certain positions are taken where if you move too fast, too hard, the pressure on you can be so great, and sometimes it can be done in ways which are quite threatening. As you saw, Hasina was threatened. You do this, we will protect you, otherwise we topple you. And you know what it is, you know what is possible. I've given the example earlier of Ronald Reagan being shot and just barely missed being killed. Trump similarly. And it shows you that if a foreign interest controls the security agency, you can be threatened anyway. And you can be made to do anything. Every head of state is a prisoner within their own security system. And I had mentioned this also when speaking of the Queen of England. And I had said at that point, I gave this example. Imagine if your butler walks up to you and says, "Madam, you have to sign this bill, otherwise poison will be put in your food." What do? Whom can you call when your entire entourage turns against you and is ready to kill you? And they will do it in ways that it will be seen as a quiet heart attack and you will be removed. And they can show you how they do it. What do you do in such a case? So one of the problems Trump had, I've mentioned, was to clean out the Secret Service. Modi similarly had his own problems. As you know, when he came to power, he had to replace the head of intelligence. Somebody that the Congress had toppled was brought back. And so the loyalties in the core team is extremely important. And this is used against Hasina as Prime Minister. She was, one of the accusations against her is that she was surrounded by a coterie. Well, every politician has to be surrounded by people they can trust. And then if the foreign influence can tap into the people they trust, they can also feed you false information, create a fake bubble of fear or false information and make you act. So being in a position of power is never easy. And that's why for me the reference is more of intention and competence. It's not enough to have good intentions. You must have competence. But having competence and intention, you may still be limited in what you can do. And I gave this example on our discussion of Modi earlier, that the first 4 years he was held back somehow. And I've also revealed there what the reason I think how and why he was held back. But again, I would not consider that he is corrupt or compromised fundamentally. Dr. Swami may have certain impressions, but he has also an axe to grind. When the BJP came to power and he joined BJP, he expected to be made finance minister. He didn't receive that. He didn't receive the support that he thought he would get, and after that he turned. Till then he was praising Modi very highly. So there are unfortunately personal elements also involved in his criticism. So I don't want to make this too much of a discussion on these trivial and superficial political affairs. But I thought this question important enough because Swami's statements often have an element of truth, but they are also warped because of his personal ambition, grouse, whatever it is, and that creates confusion among many. We can go to the next question.
From Mahesh, in one of your talks long ago, you had mentioned that the Supramental has the wisdom and ability to take what's unfavorable or hostile and work out a solution from that. I'm trying to paraphrase. This may not be the exact words, sir. And yet, in your recent talk, you mentioned that the Supramental can act, but it needs human instruments. How do we reconcile these two statements, sir?
Yes.
If human does not wake up for a long time, would the Supramental be able to forge a way ahead, even with this non-cooperation or active defiance?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So this is unfortunately one of those things which requires us to go a little deeper into the issue, but the question is excellent and I'm glad you raised it. From the supramental perspective, it is a power that is invincible when it comes with the full power. There's first a correction to be made. When the mother said there was the supramental manifestation, she said the consciousness and the light descended. but not yet the power. When the power descends, of course, it will be evident, she said. Now, nevertheless, it's the supramental consciousness and light. The power is not yet present with the full action, but still it is there implicit, even in the light and in the consciousness. So therefore, when the supramental acts and is constantly in action everywhere, it does not act in piecemeal, it acts always in a whole, simultaneously, everywhere, pushing in every way. Mother's observation to that was, when she was asked what is the supramental doing, she said, hastening the evolution in the most rapid way, but without breaking what has been created. So necessarily it means holding back. You push, but you can't push beyond a point that would cause a break in continuity. So you push. That's where an instrument which is open and receives will allow rapid action. But when something is resisting and opposing, then the action will still take place, a steady push, steady pressure, shaping, changing, using even the opposition to strengthen. So what you see, for example, in the cabal efforts to create lockdowns, and watch carefully what's happening with the monkeypox story. Watch how the fear is being ratcheted up. Do not let it affect you. Do not let the fear get into you. Watch how the game is being played, how the numbers are being increased. Numbers of infections, but not current infections. Total number of infections over 6 months, rising. And you are given the impression as if so many people are infected. They don't speak of deaths yet. But if you see the proportion of deaths compared to the numbers infected, it's trivial. Nevertheless, see the game being played and you're watching it happen. Hopefully it will not go into a full lockdown, but observe the way you are being played. And it's wonderful once you're aware to see how the game works. But when you see this happening, the event which happened before is being used by the supramental consciousness to help you wake up. So everything you throw at it, while it may seem to produce a delay initially because it's a resistance, is used to strengthen, to make the future more complete, more perfect, more effective. This is the nature of the supramental action. So it will use the means of attack to help people wake up. Nevertheless, if there are not enough sufficient instruments, its direct action may be restrained enough that the darkness may push back and may make a significant progress. In such a case also, the supramental will ensure that what emerges from that will be stronger, although the delay factor will be there. The suffering factor will be there. So the greater the delay, the more the pain, the more the suffering, even perhaps the more the destruction. Because necessarily the hard lessons are learnt with greater pain and destruction and damage. So the point is, if there is a receptive center, the supramental can rapidly enter and through that center act even in the collective. If there is not, or if there is active opposition, the supramental will use it, but there will be that much of the delay, but the victory will be certain. It will be stronger. In that sense, nothing will be wasted. Even the time lost would be used for a stronger and more complete victory. Nevertheless, it will be time lost, and it will be needless suffering and distress for all. So I give an example here, and this should be for us the most vivid. India's partition. And you can see how much suffering it has caused, not only during the partition where millions were butchered, but subsequent to the partition, all the destruction and damage, all the conflicts it has caused, and what is still going on, the suffering of the people in Bangladesh and Pakistan, where there is no nation soul, the instabilities, etc., and the decline in values and standards, the invasion of the radical ideologies. And as a result, within India, they are equivalent of mini Pakistans within India, which are actively working against India's awakening. And all of this has made for a huge setback, where India from 1947 should have been growing rapidly in consciousness, in her role in world affairs as she is meant to spiritually. There has been a huge setback. But all of that and all of the suffering will be used for perhaps a stronger, more complete, more effective integration, awakening, and so on. Nevertheless, it is time lost and suffering which was avoidable. So, if you look at it in this way, you will understand why the supramental has the means to use every attack and turn it to its advantage, but also the human instruments being there would make for a much more rapid, smooth, and less painful transition. We go to the next question.
We have a question from Vinod. How can the psychic be destroyed by outer forces?
Yes, Vinod says, how can the psychic be destroyed by outer forces? Psychic cannot be destroyed, the soul cannot be destroyed, the self cannot be destroyed, but the psychic evolution can be damaged, blocked, pushed back, and harmed in various ways. The psychic personality, which is unfolding in its evolution, can be damaged. For example, if the psychic is put through severe trauma, and I don't mean physical pain, but pain which is contrary to its values. For example, children who are made to go through various kinds of trafficking, and the kind of pain that a child is made to go through in terms of what happens. I don't want to speak those words. We have discussed this before. What the Satanists do to children does harm the psychic personality. It does take sometimes one or more lifetimes to overcome the damage done on that level, which is precisely the intention of the satanic interests. Psychic will not be destroyed, but its evolution and the personality it has formed will be damaged. And this will take time to recover. And to that extent, for that soul and for those souls, it is a setback. What happened in the concentration camps during the Nazi rule was a setback to the soul's evolution. There are people who have taken birth subsequently who still carry something of that trauma. They don't know it, they don't know the specifics of it, but the elements can be recognized. Or things like this which have happened in the past. And sometimes it leaves an imprint of a trauma which is very difficult to recognize because it's an imprint of a trauma from many lives before. And it's held in the psychic because it was hurt on its level. So we have to make the distinction between this, the psychic being and the self behind. These cannot be destroyed, but the psychic being in evolution and in form can be affected, and what it has built up can be pushed back, or the outer personality can be so hardened and darkened that the psychic being within suffocates. Or even as in the satanic practices, an entity may be introduced within who takes over the personality, and the psychic being within suffers or may even choose to withdraw if it sees no purpose in continuing. So all of these are setbacks for the psychic and spiritual evolution, and so much of what is being done today is intended for that. A lot of the woke ideology of sexualizing children early is intended to do this, to damage the sensitivity of the personality on the surface as it's forming, and the psychic influence which is filling the personality is made as if to shrink back and withdraw and be covered up by the hardness and the darkness of the contrary values. The result would be a humanity that grows up without a strong psychic influence. Where the psychic is strong enough, it would still leak through, but with great struggle. But in the large part of humanity where the psychic influence is not strong enough, you would have robots, hardened people who would have lost what we would normally call their essential humanity. Sri Aurobindo's observation about the place of the psychic being within us, he says, without the psychic influence within us, human beings would be merely thinking animals. And the animal part is the vital physical instincts. Upon that, a rational covering which uses those instincts or is used by those instincts to justify and drive themselves. And that's what we see so much of humanity was during the barbaric phase. Effectively, it would be a return to barbarism. Recall the text I read last time, what the mother says about having to rebuild civilization. I want to also put this in context with what Mahesh's question earlier about the supramental. Even if this happens, the supramental consciousness has the ability to rebuild everything from zero if it requires zero. Hopefully it won't. But it can rebuild. It just means that much more time and that much more lost. We go to Nitin's question.
Nitin is writing, I'm pained by this talk first time in 20 years, without knowing the poison being impregnated by Modi and his disciples is unprecedented. It hits at the basic ethos of unity in diversity. And two paramount reasons to be cautious after independence, as explained by Sri Aurobindo, is attached here under. I firmly believe means do not justify ends. Most Hindus, and I am a Jain Hindu by birth, but trying to live life in the light of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, so I do not support the hate that is raining on India. As per Sri Aurobindo, the seed of the problem is within. So in harmony is to be the sole objective, at least Modi and his junta cannot resort to unparliamentary language.
Okay. I've kept the comment in full, and I
There's
can
another
appreciate.
question
Yes,
after Nitin.
yes, I will
Shall
hold
we
that.
read
Yes,
that
no,
too?
no. I will take that
After.
up in the answer itself. So I've put this because I understand Nitin's pain and the issues which are bothering him, and I want precisely to use this as an indicator of what we discussed last time about the way the toolkit works. Remember last time we spoke of how the toolkit is essential to prepare a ground of doubt, confusion, and leading to fear and then hatred towards whoever they want to topple. If once in the public this image is formed, toppling is assisted by the masses. Now, within India, as it turns out, fortunately, the larger part of India is backing Modi. And at best, they can be clouded or confused. Within Bangladesh, it was the same story. Hasina was largely backed by the majority of the Bangladeshis, which you saw in the election results. But outside India, outside Bangladesh, you see this pattern where the fear and hatred has been built up already. But within India, those who have been, so to say, swept away by this propaganda have typically the response of Nitin, and I want to appreciate Nitin's goodwill in even stating these things. But also I want to point out that so much of what you have said, Nitin, as well as what follows in his next comment or question, is largely the programming given to you, the impressions created for you by the media which is hostile to national interest and including the Modi. The same thing happens in the US. So I've had these conversations in the United States with a few people who were rabidly against Trump. And many of them had this very strong programming which came from the MK Ultra, which is described by many as Trump derangement syndrome. If they hear the name Trump, suddenly there's violent, visceral anger, hatred, which surges up. And I saw this happening with people and with spiritual people. And to see them in that state was even disconcerting. And then the people began to shout in anger, abusing Trump, saying he's a misogynist, this, and a series of abusive terms. I'd never seen these people talk like this about anybody. And it was not them. It was the programming which kicked in. And I had a conversation subsequently. I just took one issue. They were saying, oh, he's against ecological interests. And I said, for example, I said, see, he started the steel industry and coal mining. And I said to them, but you know what was happening? And when I gave the facts, the people were shocked. I said, oh, is that so? And I even offered, I said, raise any issue that you have where you think Trump did wrong. And very likely I will be able to offer you an explanation of why and what was the rationale behind. And when you understand that, you'll see it was not wrong, it was even necessary. So we went through a few points, and then when they saw that there was a justification, they shut down because the cognitive dissonance was too strong. And subsequently, they just avoided meeting me, which was fine. It was their choice. But what I'm showing you is it's difficult once the programming is strong enough that the hatred or fear has been built up within you. And so I see in Nitin's observation something of this, The first point he makes, you cannot resort to unparliamentary language. What is unparliamentary in his language? And I will take the examples Nitin has given, but also the comment Nitin and his junta. This junta is typically a word, keyword which is programmed into you. So they'll speak, for example, of oligarchy around people, junta around people, or his worshippers and things like that. Bhakt in India is the term used for anybody who appreciates Modi. You're a Modi Bhakta, meaning devotee of Modi. I'm also a critic, but I appreciate the good work he does, and I will criticize what he has failed to do so far. But that does not make me in any way a part of any such junta or something. But such terms which are derogatory are used by the toolkit to dehumanize a person. And once dehumanized, it is easy to topple. It is easy to influence. So I'm going to take up one by one. But he is also connected to Sri Aurobindo. Nitin says, according to Sri Aurobindo, the seed of the problem is within. Yes. Within whom? Within each one, yes. But in what form? So I will say for you, for example, for Nitin yourself, what is your limitation? You will certainly never commit a crime. But you must build within you the discrimination, without which you will be easily swept by the programming. What is the seed of the problem within Modi? Perhaps he lacks courage to take certain positions because of whatever political or other limitations. But what is the seed of the problem in those who attack violently India's interests, India's survival? There the seed of the problem is their hatred, their perversion. And that is more serious than your weakness or your incapacity. There is a perversion. Between the two, I would rather protect you despite whatever weaknesses you have than stand for the perversion which would destroy an entire civilization and perhaps the future of humanity. So we have to be very careful of how you understand the seed of the problem is within. Does not mean everyone goes to meditate. Because if you start meditating for the Asura, it is the perfect solution. Please go and meditate. You leave the space open to take over. This is what happened for the last 2000 years in the ascetic phase. You threw away the money saying, oh, this is evil. You threw away power and the Asura took it and sat on your head and took over your country. You could not fight back because you gave away power also and strength. So the moment you take back power and wealth and strength and begin to exercise them, you will make mistakes. Inevitably, because you're still learning. You're like a child learning to wield power. You have not done it for 2000 years. When you make mistakes, we have to understand whether it is incompetence or intention. If it is intention, I would say this person is wrong, should be removed. When it is incompetence, then I will say let's put the right people to assist or replace. But mistakes are acceptable as part of a learning. And Sri Aurobindo's observation in 1909 or 10, I believe, where he says, it is becoming increasingly clear that India will pass through the experiment of parliamentary democracy simply to realize that it is not suited for us. And this he writes after severely criticizing the parliamentary system of democracy, where he says it has brought Europe to its sorry pass. But having destroyed Europe, in India it has come in, and he sees this happening ahead, nearly 37 years ahead. And he says it will be an experiment simply to realize that it is not suited for us. Now consider from 1947 to 2024, this experiment has been ground on, despite it failing repeatedly. And the question is, when will we wake up and say, okay, this does not work and we need to set our own presidential framework with our own innate constitution? And if someone raises this, immediately you will be labeled a tyrant by the toolkit which is antagonistic to India's reawakening. So when I come back to this question of the seed within, I'm going to expand this to include this. The weakness of our incapacity to do what is right is also part of that seed. And even this passage of parliamentary democracy being necessary even to realize that it is not suited for us is part of the making of mistakes. Whom will you blame this? You can blame the entire committee which made the Constitution of India. I've left you a link, interestingly, for today, and I've put the numbering in continuation from last time, which shows you who were the people who actually formed the Constitution and what was their thinking, how they were basically educated in the British mindset, had absolutely no Indic values or understanding of Indic traditions, could not do anything except what they did because that was their narrow, limited mindset. It's a fascinating article. I found it very illuminating and helpful to understand why. But if this be the mistake, and I still accept that the mistake was needed, perhaps there was no other way at that time, when will we outgrow? This would be the question I would put. So I come back to Modi's, Nitin's second comment, and I'm going to read rapidly from portions of it and respond to each. He says, I had been a blind devotee of Modi since Godhra incident until February 24. And here, when the Supreme Court's ruling on electoral bonds as unconstitutional made me delve deeper into Modi's actions. From that moment, I realized there's a stark contrast between his words and deeds. He presents himself as Ram, but his election campaign revealed a taste of Ravan. No, I'm sorry, this is a complete restating of what the Congress party has been programming you with. Modi never claims to be Ram, never claims to be even imitating Ram. He has love and devotion for Ram, that stops there. But this is the kind of propaganda that if you read without thinking, you will simply end up repeating what you have read. So then you have given your series of accusations. I'll read a few. First accusation Nitin makes, disrespecting the Supreme Court judgment. Modi ridiculed Supreme Court judgment on electoral bonds, stating that they would regret it later, showing his disdain for the judiciary. No, that's not correct. He did not ridicule. He did say they will regret it later, but for a reason. The electoral bonds was a mechanism intended to prevent the massive use of black money during elections, that is unaccounted cash. And it had actually channeled money out of the cash system into an official, we will call it white money framework. It was a huge step forward. It was not the best solution. It was itself a compromise, but it was a huge step forward. And when the Supreme Court cancelled the electoral bonds, remember it was done just 2 months before and demanded the list be revealed, it was done with mischievous intentions. You must understand the Supreme Court itself is massively compromised. And they were playing their game of the toolkit. And Modi said they would regret it because what it did was it brought back the black money economy, pushed back huge amount of funds into the underground economy, cash economy, and brought back massive corruption in elections. So this was the reason why he said. And it was not disdain for judiciary, nor was it ridiculing. So these are all impressions created by the media toolkit. Similarly, Nitin says, Electoral Commission appointments, there's a manipulation in the appointments. It has raised doubts about the fairness. No, you are just repeating what the toolkit told you just before elections. And I find it interesting, Nitin's observation is from February 2024, he turned against. Why? And if you look back our discussion last time, that was when the toolkit was activated. Every possible criticism that they made of Modi, most of it unjustified, we find Nitin repeating blindly without thinking. So even he says, Hindenburg report, it exposed dubious financial dealings under Modi's watch, causing significant blow to India's credibility. I'm reading from Nitin's observation. No, it was not. Whatever corruption existed in the financial dealings, in the stock markets, is the result of what was done for the last 50 years. It got exposed under Modi's watch. You have to understand the difference. It was happening, it was considered normal, it got exposed. You understand? And again, it's so childish to say Independence Day speech was filled with rhetoric but lacked substance. Who said this? The Congress party said this. Did they justify it? No. Did you hear the speech actually? The speech had very useful substance. He was setting forward policies for the nation, steps to move forward. But what does this opposition do? They make these glib comments. But you don't have to believe them. Think for yourself. Disrespect towards leader of opposition by calling the leader of opposition childish mind, balak buddhi. He demonstrated disregard for democratic norms. No, it was Rahul Gandhi who spoke in such stupid and childish terms, so ridiculous. Everybody in parliament had to laugh. They could not contain themselves. But when this kind of accusations are made, Modi was actually politely stated, this is a childish mind. It's a polite statement. He did not use abusive terms, in fact. So again, I've read this, and the point I want to make is this is exactly the toolkit of the Congress propaganda or the cabal propaganda. Undermining democracy. I'm reading from Nitin. Religious polarization. He has deepened polarization. No, he has actually unified India. For the first time, this is the only leader who's speaking of everybody together, growing together. In fact, the criticism against him from Swami is that he's not doing enough for Hindus. He's done so much for Muslims and Christians and Sikhs and others, but nothing for Hindus. So, where is the polarization? Authoritarianism, again, this is part of the toolkit. Increasingly autocratic style of governance where dissent is crushed and opposition sidelined is a threat to India's democracy. Show me one example where this has been done. It is entirely made up as an accusation. In fact, this happened very strangely. In one conversation I had with the Lagras Center, somebody came online and said, how do you explain that under Modi so many media personalities were accused of corruption, or some of them were even jailed? And this is authoritarianism. No, it's not. These were people who actively did corruption, which was anti-Indian. They were receiving funds from China. They were acting against India's interests. Just because they have labeled themselves journalists does not mean they are not stooges for an anti-Indian agenda. And if they have committed crimes, economic crimes in this case, should they not be put behind bars or face the consequences of whatever those under law? Or is the law to be withdrawn from people if just because they are journalists or politicians for that matter? In fact, the common man has lost faith in the law because all the journalists and politicians who are corrupt and blatantly and openly corrupt get away with it. It's only the common man who suffers consequences. So if Modi has brought back the rule of law and exposed corruption, you cannot call that authoritarianism. That is how the toolkit works. When their agents are exposed or put behind bars, that is turned into authoritarianism. This is what happened with Hasina. Because she was exposing those who were vocally in the, I will say, extremist Islam and reined in their open agendas, she was declared authoritarian. You have to be very careful not to repeat blindly what the media has taught you. So I think this is all I will do with Nitin's observations. But I can see, at least the way he has articulated himself, it seems to be very genuine in his intention. But be very careful. And this is the objective of my bringing this into the discussion. All these things I am bringing in so that you can you can help yourself break out of the hypnosis and start thinking and cut through this clutter. And sometimes it's painful because you have to change your stance. I believed something and now I'm proved to be wrong in my belief. No, recognize you were hypnotized. You were fed false information and now you're cutting through it and facing things for what they are. Again, Modi is not a perfect man. He has his limitations. But understand the good he has done and is doing and why the cabal is afraid of him and wants to topple him. We go to the next question.
We have received a letter from Pascal, so I will read it with a translation from French.
Can I take one brief pause before this? I think this is the ideal occasion also to give you the list of things I've put as references in continuation from last time, because it highlights one very important aspect. So one of the references last time, which was this Justice of Supreme Court saying we will rip you apart. Please look at that and you understand. I also gave a reference to the Indian Medical Association head who declares himself a missionary and wants to put as many Christians as possible for purpose of conversion into the medical agenda and is violently against indigenous Ayurvedic and other healing traditions. Why? Because they don't fit into whatever agenda that he serves. You will see the full interview, the full description is there, and the link is quite disturbing. But also I mentioned how Chief Justice of India advised the probe agencies not to go after criminals but to focus on attacks from outside India. I've put that link. And most important, the link I had mentioned of 7 ex-High Court judges writing to the President, Chief Justice, election commissioner on the fairness of polls the day before the result of the polls were to be released. Now remember, these are the players: President, Chief Justice, Election Commissioner, and the High Court judges now saying you must act if the polls are not fair. Interestingly, because Congress had a reasonably strong push forward, they had gains, the same people went silent. In other words, when the results were in the direction that they wanted, they went silent. Had Congress lost heavily, then they would have said, see, the fairness of the poll was compromised and now you must take action. So I've put that link also. Understand how close the whole attack was all set. Look at this and notice how they've all gone silent, and that shows you they had an agenda. And since the agenda moved forward, they didn't raise issues. I've also put a link to the Supreme Court speaking of women as pregnant person. In other words, the entire top leadership in the Supreme Court has taken on the woke agenda and is pushing the woke agenda. And this is a very serious threat for India. You must understand, they've also pushed it into the educational system, into schools, and through the NCERT textbooks under Modi. So again, my criticism, Modi can do nothing because the group which controls these educational systems are still largely leftist and under control of the, cabal interests. Another link regarding Supreme Court is, this is a leftist newspaper, interestingly, The Wire, which is asking, why did the Supreme Court need to hear the RG car case? Please read it, it's fascinating. So here in Kolkata, this rape took place. The High Court was seized of the matter. CBI had been brought in and the investigation had begun, going full steam. The entire pressure was on the Chief Minister. I'm going to keep this for a discussion next time. Today I could not bring it up. I will go in detail, show you how the game is played. And the entire pressure was on the Chief Minister. Nobody was there to back her. Instantly the Supreme Court steps in, suo motu, that is on its own. It takes the entire responsibility for the case to Delhi, shifts the focus off from the Chief Minister, and starts its own orders and investigations, interfering with the High Court and CBI, which had already started their work, and delaying further the actual investigation. So you have to understand the game being played is quite subtle. You see, from the moment they took over, there's no pressure on the Chief Minister anymore, in the media at least. So the Supreme Court is a cabal-controlled agency and was already set up. And I will answer the question, why did they need to hear the RG Kar case? Because there is an agenda to build the Chief Justice of India and the Supreme Court as a representative protecting democratic values or India's future or etc. They are being set up the way Yunus is set up for leading Bangladesh. So when the toolkit activates itself, it will be the Chief Justice now takes charge and decides to dismiss the government or appoint a new interim government or whatever the game they want to play. But for that, they need to build the Chief Justice in a certain image. And this is the game why they have to do this. Any national issue of concern suddenly is taken up by Supreme Court, even though it's being acted upon through agencies. And it's almost as if Supreme Court has nothing else to do, one would think. In fact, they literally have lakhs of cases hanging for the last 50 years that they have not yet taken up, they're not interested in taken up, and they will keep wallowing upon because they keep making money every time the case is delayed. The lawyers make money every time they stand for a hearing, which never happens. It's in a listing, you pay them to stand, and they never stand because it didn't come up for listing, but it could have, so you had to pay money. And all the judges were lawyers, and they're all cahoots with each other. When a lawyer makes money, they pay their commission to the judges. This is the game. So the Supreme Court justices, for all their pompous pretensions of authority and good for the country, are equally corrupt in the corrupt system and are sustaining and feeding, continuing the corruption. This is the hard reality. And they play this game of suo motu, taking cases where it was not in their interest to intervene. But an image is being built up, understand. And I watch equally the foreign media, how it is presented. And again, the Chief Justice is being propped up there. So the game is tight. And I don't know what is the duration of the current Chief Justice or what the allegiance of the next Chief Justice is. But the game will be activated during this Chief Justice's tenure. What form it will take is to be seen. But I've also put, because of Nitin's observations, I put two more links: 30 reasons why I remember Modi government in 2019 and 75 reasons why I will remember Modi government in 2024. Take a look at that. The man has written some very interesting things, including failures. But you get a sweep of the radical changes that have taken place in India under Modi government, which should have happened 70 years ago and did not happen. So at the very least, appreciate the good that Modi has done, and do not let yourself be blinded by temporary appearances. I've also put something which is against Modi in some sense. Anand Ranganathan speaks directly to PM Modi and describes of what needs to be done to protect India, and particularly the Hindu values. Because if that is lost, there will be no India, and it will be division. India will be broken into so many pieces, which is what is the Kapal interest. But what he speaks is very important, and you should hear. And the last link is about the colonial constitution of India. What was the drafting committee, their background, and why the constitution has such a colonial form. So do look at it. I have summarized key points of why I've put those links. They are all very useful and very important. I think we can go to the next question.
So
This
we
goes
have a
into the
letter.
spiritual dimension. Yes.
We have a letter received from Pascal, which was translated from French. I've just watched Sraddhalu's first 9 videos on the current affairs, and I'd like to thank him very much for them. I find them extremely useful. I would like to share a few comments and questions. First, the world of light behind the wall made me think of the world of truth that doubles our own, which Mother talks about in the agenda, like 2 superimposed worlds. And then the wall also made me think of the wave of grayness that surrounds the earth and the physical mind with its imbecilic, defeatist beliefs, which keeps telling us that it's impossible, that we won't make it. That's all just a daydream and so on. Do these analogies seem correct to you?
Yes, certainly this wall which prevents the forward movement includes this illusion of impossibility of a positive future. The sense of defeatist acceptance of current circumstances and events. Particularly among the youth, this has been so deeply imprinted that there is a loss even of the idealism. The mother spoke of this in context of the Second World War. She said after the Second World War, or I don't know if the context was First World War, but she says after the war, after the Great War, there was a huge cynicism which came upon the earth, and the idealism was as if covered up. But it's grown much worse now, and you will see the cinema of today going back nearly now 20 years. It started in 2004 onwards and then amplified in 2006 when Obama came to power. All the heroes, all the superheroes of Hollywood, for example, were turned into dark beings, and the dark beings were made to be grey or even positive in certain ways, so that you could not make a clear black and white situation. Everybody was grey, everybody had problems, and you just had to say it's all relative, there's no good or bad, or everyone is good, including the bad. This turn came, and the entire generation which has grown up with that kind of cinema and with those stories denied deeper or higher stories which have inspired humanity for millennia. For that entire group, this is a reality. They look and they see no future. This is part of the leftist ideological mind grip. I've observed very carefully a few people who were in the leftist grip, and these are two things which I understood, or maybe there are three things. One of them is that the past has been removed. They are not told anything of the greatness of the past. And so all they know of the past is domination by one group over another. And so all those groups had to be destroyed or removed. And the freedom which comes from the communist revolution, supposedly a freedom. And so they have this ideological vacuum of the past. Nothing to look back to or to stand on. You're standing on shifting sands. You look to the future, and all you see there is oppression and the need to fight oppression and overcome oppressive groups. And the complementing idea, the majority always oppresses the minority. So they are programmed to think in terms of the minority being oppressed. And I had a conversation with one of these who said, "Do you accept that the majority dominates the minority?" I said, "Perhaps in some places, but in India it's not true. It's the very opposite." And I gave him the examples, and he got upset and stopped the conversation. But he couldn't counter it factually. So this is the second vacuum. There is no future. You're left in the middle, and in the middle what is there is only the revolution. Somehow the revolution will set it right. And so they're angry, they're tense, they're fighting, but against what? They don't know. Against everything, break the system, go against the rich, go against those in power. And then what? Nothing. Or they fall back to those very beautiful words: no borders, no religions, we are all one, no differences amongst each other. Yes, that's kind of a communist ideology, even if it's John Lennon who sang a song which was largely in that direction, which is has some kind of an idealism. It grasped a truth, but the way it articulated it: no borders, no differences, everybody uniform. It seems like a cabal objective almost. And yet maybe John Lennon saw something more beautiful, I don't know. But you see how the communist ideology, once it grips your mind, you're left with just vacuums and anger and hatred and reaction against what, and you don't even know. So yes, all these things are part of it. But more than that, what I tried to also convey in the first 4 or 5 discussions on current affairs was there is also an active, organized, satanic cabal that has formed this and holds this barrier. They've created it, it's not happened by chance. And they hold it and protect it to prevent the light, to prevent the young from waking up to an idealism or touching a higher light. We can continue to his next.
The second comment on the subject of money. I found this message from Mother published in the agenda of 6th January 1955. A day will come when, finally liberated from the domination of anti-divine forces, all the riches of this world will give themselves spontaneously and totally to the service of the divine work on earth.
Yes. So this is the future she is looking at. And we have to understand it is inevitable that a day will come when, finally liberated from the domination of anti-divine forces, all the riches of this world will give themselves spontaneously and totally to the service of the divine work on earth. I would even suggest that in small pockets in the world, bits of the wealth is also opening up and coming in service of the divine work on earth. It's happening in little bits all over. And I'm comparing today with what was 10 years ago, what was 20 years ago, and what was 30 years ago. Clearly there is a progression in that direction. And for the Asuric forces which owned the wealth, it's not nice to feel it slipping out from their grip. But right now it's still small little flows, and so they're not too worried. But they do see where it's going. And they know that an end will come for what they are doing. But so this is the assurance the mother gives because she's seeing it. But when? That depends again on us. Our instrumentation, the effort we make, and how much we are willing to open to the action of the supramental consciousness. We go to the next question.
Third, the Asura knows that the Divine Mother will destroy it, but before that happens, it will do as much damage as possible. But how does an Asura die? Aren't they supposed to be immortal? Will this be a purely occult phenomenon, or will we see and feel visible, tangible signs of it in the outside world?
Yes, for sure there will be an external result which will be visible. But an Asura is not immortal in its current form. Understand what an Asura represents. It represents a certain aspect of the divine consciousness which in its freedom has chosen to go against the divine will. So it has a truth, it turns around and goes against its own truth. That is an Asura. So that which was light now turns against light, becomes darkness. That which was life turns against and becomes death. But it says, well, I choose to do what I want. And in the act of choosing to break away from the underlying oneness, it asserts its individual dominance, even if it's a cosmic power, its distinctive characteristic over all else by domination. And because it's unconnected to the oneness, it now causes great distress, breaks the harmony underlying, and therefore causes suffering, etc. But it's satisfied in its experience. It says, oh, this is worth it. It's fun to do it, or this is what I want, and my greatness is all that matters, whatever the form of it. So what does it mean for the asura to end? It finally recognizes, oh, all this I have done for myself is not worthwhile, because I realize I am one with the divine, I am one with the all, and I choose to realign myself with the one. That would be the simplest way. Now the asura ceases to be asura, comes back to its origin from its freedom, and lives now as an active force and power of the divine. No more darkness, now it is a power for light. No more death, it is a power for life. That would be one way that the asura changes. Or, as the mother observed in one of the asura's case, it agreed to be withdrawn into the divine and ceased to be present as an active force opposing the divine will. That also can happen. Or a third option, which will be the interim. When the asura does not find any more points of entry in a collective or an individual, it says, this is not very much interesting. It goes somewhere else where it finds that point of entry. And there are innumerable planets all over the universe which are still at a stage of evolution where they are vulnerable to all kinds of influences of this kind. So when our Earth's humanity outgrows the vulnerability to this kind of petty, narrow egoism or its drives, those forces will say, this is not very interesting, we go elsewhere. And so here's a space where the primary or direct influence of the asuric is no more accessible or relevant. And from that point on, the evolution takes a different direction. So there are many options here. It does not mean the asura dies as in die, but it ceases to be an asura in that sense. I think that explains enough, satisfies the question. But there will be visible results externally, because the push that you feel, suddenly you see children when they're playing, they push, oh, that feels nice, push harder, that feels nice. And now suddenly the force seizes them and they push very hard and give a blow. And you can feel that was a force outside which poked and then got in and pushed. And the child is shocked and surprised. Where did this come from? That sort of thing, you see, where you gain an entry. Then either from within the soul says, no, I don't want this, and refuses, or it says, oh, this is fun, I'm going to do this more and more. And it identifies with that force and allows it to enter, and now becomes a vehicle more and more for that. That sort of thing would become less and less. So there will be visible signs, of course.
The fourth question. The extremely dangerous situation we are going to face this year and next reminds me of those extraordinary lines by Savitri, my favorite. When darkness deepens, strangling the earth's breast, and man's corporeal mind is the only lamp, as a thief's in the night shall be the covered thread of one who steps unseen into his house. In your opinion, are we in the deepest darkness that strangles the earth's chest? Is this line of Savitri's relevant to our situation, or is it something else?
For sure it is relevant. But are we already in the deepest of the darkness? No. It can grow much worse. And it can grow even more worse. One would hope that that will not happen. So I've been saying this for a few years now as a way of warning, so that you may prepare yourself, but also that you may act to prevent it. And I've said things will get worse before they get better. They will get better after. But before that, in the short term, things will get worse. What can you do? You can take steps now to ensure it does not get too much worse. Because after all, it's a collective, it's the result of a collective lack. So if enough of us begin to make this change within us and in our immediate environs, we will limit how much worse it can get. But a little bit worse it will still get because the momentum is already there. We will hasten the getting better and the turn upwards, make it happen sooner because of the effort we make. So my reason for stating this is not to discourage, it's to warn, to prepare for, but also to take steps to limit, to minimize, and to hasten the upward turn. But if this does not happen, remember the warning Mother said, I hope it will not be through one of those nights of civilization that we have to pass. And it is that night of civilization that is being referred to here, when man's corporeal mind is the only lamp. That means the strangling of the darkness is so great, there is nothing else left except your own physical thinking mind. That's the only light. The spiritual light is almost inaccessible. At that point, as a thief in the night shall be the covert tread of the divine entering, you see, of one who steps unseen into his house. But the hope is that we will not reach that. And we must make sure it does not happen. We must do everything in our capacity today and every day hereafter to ensure that it does not go into that direction. And I believe it is possible to prevent that extreme. But what does this mean for the divine entering as a thief into his house? Well, the idea is often, and it has happened in the past, when there was that most extreme darkness, the inner divine in each one, suffocating in the darkness, has called for the help. And it is a desperation, a call of desperation, when there is this help specially given. And I give an example here where there was a state of desperation, not necessarily of this kind, but a different kind. When France was going to be overrun by the English forces, and there was nothing in the populace or in the king, no competence, no organization, no organized strength to protect. But it was essential for France to not be overrun, for the larger work to be done in future. The thing which France had to be protected. And so there was this special emanation which came in the form of Joan of Arc, Jeanne d'Arc in French. And Joan of Arc is a woman who has no training, but she is the one only receptive instrument. Nobody in the king, around the king, in the army has it. Otherwise, suddenly someone in the army would have woken up and done it. Nobody is available. And so this woman is taken, a peasant woman from the village, and is made to stand against the full organized power of the English army and defeat. Not once but repeatedly. And then what happens? You see, again, the common people still have not woken up. Rather than saying, oh, this is what we should have done. Rather than saying, this is what we will do hereafter. Rather than saying, here's the leader we need, and now let's make her the chief of army or whatever it is, to protect, to organize, to rebuild our nation. What do? They burn her at the stake. You may say it was the church interest, the church got insecure, they burnt her, which was unfortunately the characteristic of the church. But what did the common people do? What did the king's people do? What did the king do? Not one person could stand to say, here is something precious, we want this gem, and not to burn it away. And it shows you what happens when the lack of receptivity in humanity is so widespread that although the action of the divine will intervene to protect in the most extreme, and it only prevented the invasion, the people still could not receive and had to go through so much more suffering needlessly, and even turned against the divine's help at that point. And the poor woman had to go through all that suffering also for having saved her country. And it is in this sense you have to understand, today, even if there is an intervention of this kind, and there was, not one but several times it has happened, with Modi's election in 2014, with Trump's election in 2016, and other minor, major interventions. are we still willing to stand up for the help given, or will we reject again, go back to sleep, or even burn at the stake the form in which the help came, whatever its limitations? And all depends on, are we conscious enough to see through the deceptive appearances to what is true behind, and then cling to what is true. And it's a measure of our evolution, it's a measure of our readiness, it's a measure of how much we are willing to exercise either the soul's light or even the rational light. So that's the corporeal mind. At least with that, if we can see through and say, yes, at least there's a point here. But the soul's light can see right through and says, it's obvious. That will be the measure of whether the help being given will take us through now, or we will have to go through much suffering and awaken later. We go to the next question.
You mentioned that within the European Union, the member states still have a certain amount of freedom. Factually, that must be true, but only on points of detail. I can't speak for all French people, but it seems to me that the majority of French people have understood that the UE is a tyranny that wants the death of nation states, and we are suffering a great deal from the policies imposed by the EU. And for those of us who know Sri Aurobindo, we are waiting with immense hope for our deliverance and for aphorism 76 to finally come true.
So this is a quote from Sri Aurobindo. Now, yes.
Yes. Europe prides herself on her practical and scientific organization and efficiency. I am waiting till her organization is perfect. Then a child shall destroy her. I would like to draw your attention to the word organization. Before 1957 Treaty of Rome, which marked the official start of European integration, Europe had no real organization, since each state had its own organization and was still very independent. It was from the time of these disastrous European treaties that Europe began to be organized by force without the real consent of the people, who now reject it en masse. And if the people have accepted it, it is as a result of manipulation campaigns that have hidden the true nature and objectives of European integration. Do you think my interpretation, particularly of the word organization, is correct? On 11 September 71, Mother told us about this aphorism. I have the impression that it came as something absolutely true, a prediction absolutely true, but I don't know. I don't think the time has come yet. I mean, for the realization. The time has come to say it, but not for the realization. That's 53 years. Do you think the time has finally come for the European Union to come to an end? How do you think this aphorism could be fulfilled? And can we help to make it happen? For us in France and for the most people in Europe, this is undoubtedly the most important political issue.
Okay. So I understand the direction of the question is largely looking at the European Union being literally a suffocation of the freedom of the people. I've actually spoken about this in the earlier discussions on the current affairs, where I described how the cabal has taken control of Europe, and even that there is a European Parliament in which effectively the people, they nominate, control everything. And the elected people of the states even have practically no say of the direction in which their national interests go, where their economy goes, and so on. And each person who is in the control structure is, well, a cabal puppet and is placed there for that purpose. And there has been in Europe this, what I've referred to earlier, the Kalergi plan of Count Kalergi, which actually was part of also the Nazi original concept of unification of Europe, which the person who was responsible for unification of Europe under Nazi rule was the one who later took it up as part of the European Union. So there's a continuity of that energy and that ideology. Nevertheless, we must recognize the union of Europe is necessary. And Sri Aurobindo speaks of this, and he speaks of how Europe will eventually grow into a, I don't remember the exact, he uses the phrase, the United States of Europe. This is the phrase he has used. And similarly with the USSR, he speaks there of a community of states, something, he has used a phrase there for similar aggregation. But the idea is the unification is absolutely needed and inevitable in the intention of nature. The problem is this has been hijacked by the cabal to make for a uniformity and not a living integration, which would be a federal structure, which would give enormous freedom to the people, to nations, and to even subgroups within the nations. This has been subverted by the EU's current organization, and it is this which has to change, not the nature of, not the fact of the EU itself. So this is the first part of what I would put as an observation in relation to Pascal's comments. But the second part is regarding this aphorism, where he says, so Sri Aurobindo puts it this way: Europe prides herself on her practical and scientific organization and efficiency. I am waiting till her organization is perfect, then a child shall destroy her. And mother says the time has come to speak of it, but not yet for the realization of this. And then she comments on this observation. When Sri Aurobindo writes, I am waiting, she says it's as if the divine says, I am waiting. But it's very clear, and mother explains this. She says, it is not the destruction of Europe. It is the destruction of the power of Europe. But I will go a little further into elaboration here. If you see, the aphorism itself is about the pride of Europe in her practical and scientific organization and efficiency. And you must understand the time when this was written. It was at a time when Europe, and not yet the United States, but primarily Europe, was the hub of this organization, efficiency. And efficiency was the big word. It was all mechanical. In the United States, the assembly line productions had started. Industries were moving towards organization and efficiency, hierarchical organizations and efficiencies which were mechanical. And all this was moving towards a humanity which was becoming more and more mechanical in the name of organization and efficiency. And there was a pride in this. Look, we are so efficient. Look, we are so organized. What has happened in practice, the more this organization got fixed, the more it became suffocation and an inflexibility. The moment everybody, let's say in a company, and then extend it to a nation, is perfectly aligned and organized in attunement, you don't have a choice except to do what is required to sustain the organization and its efficiency. You cannot say, you know what, I need a break for 10 minutes. Because if you take a break for 10 minutes, the entire machinery of interdependence of that perfect organization breaks down. And that's the problem of organization. The more organized, the more suffocating, the more rigid, the more soul stifling, soul numbing, and soul killing of humanity. And it is in this direction that Sri Aurobindo is pointing. And the second part of it is the efficiency of the organization, where everything now happens so smoothly. Why? And observe how it works when you make that organization so efficient. Everything needs to know everything else, and everything is interdependent on everything else. Practical, scientific, organization, efficiency. Practical and scientific represents physical and mental. Now, the moment you've built this, it's a gridlock in which you are a cog wheel of a machine. Society is a machine. You have no say, no right, no freedom, no soul. This is the dream of the cabal also. So, but then Sri Aurobindo's warning, when I'm waiting till her organization is perfect, then a child shall destroy her. And we've seen this happen in many ways already. When you find these people who are hackers, they get into the machinery of that organization through the internet or other means and play around there and bring the entire machinery to a halt. You saw this happening several times in the last 1 year. Now, it was done by hacking, it was done by certain interests. Perhaps some of these were also tests by the cabal to create an excuse to shut down the internet. This also will be used very likely in the coming 1 year. But the point is, the more organized and efficient, the more fragile is the efficiency and organization. With the tiniest thing going off track brings everything to a halt. That's why a child shall destroy her. Destroy what? The power of that organization. So it was very specifically in this sense that Sri Aurobindo articulated it, at least that's how I feel it. And Mother's observation that the time has not yet come, that was 71, but we have seen this happen already multiple times, where a tiny bug or a tiny hacking can create such a destabilization of this perfection. And the point of Sri Aurobindo's aphorism is this practical and scientific organization, that is mind and physical efficiency, is not the future. It is inherently vulnerable, and you might be proud of it for a while, but there will come a time where the whole thing will break down. What is needed is something which is more living, which allows for a greater flexibility and freedom. So what I would put this in the context of the future is all the things, and all this organization efficiency is very useful. Computerizing machinery and factory production, but not computerizing human life. So we must make this distinction. This thing has a place, and it will go into the factory where the machines will be run with that organization and efficiency. But human beings, by that time, hopefully will be free of the need to be workers in such factories. It will all be done by robots. We need not take the place of those robots anymore. We can be living, creative, and growing people. And that would be the correct way forward for the future. But so I don't think the intention should be even for the European Union to come to an end. But the hijacking of the Union, which is the case, needs to be overthrown. And once again, the freedom of the people and of the higher spiritual goodwill and intentions with a greater vision, creating a federal structure of freedom, decentralized, needs to replace this, what has become already a behemoth of the world state sitting on top of Europe, and which they want to extend to the whole world. So I think with this I'm going to close today's discussion with quotation from the mother. This is also from the agenda, 4th December 1971. It's a time when she gave many warnings during that period. And this was at a time when also there was the danger of attack on India. And she says this: the world situation is critical today, and we will take it as also applying to us today. India's fate too is hanging in the balance. There was a time when India was absolutely secure. There was no danger whatsoever of her being victim to Asuric aggression. But things have changed. People and forces in India have acted in such a way as to invite Asuric influences upon her. These have worked insidiously and undermined the security that was there. If India is in danger, Pondicherry cannot be expected to remain outside the danger zone. It will share the fate of the rest of the country. Now comes the part, and this is very clear about the protection from the divine. The protection I can give is not unconditional. Take it as the Divine Mother telling you. The protection I can give is not unconditional. It is idle to hope that in spite of anything and everything, the protection will be there over all. My protection is there if conditions are fulfilled. It goes without saying that any sympathy or support for the Nazis or for any ally of theirs automatically cuts across the circle of protection. So this was actually in 1941, May 25th, which Mother repeats in 1971, because she describes how it has relevance even at that point. And today we see how it has relevance today. So, it goes without saying that any sympathy or support for the Nazi or any ally of theirs, we will say cabal interests or satanic interests, automatically cuts across the circle of protection. Apart from this obvious and external factor, there are more fundamental psychological conditions which demand fulfillment. She didn't say, oh, it'll be good to have this. She said they demand fulfillment, and these conditions demand to be fulfilled if you want the protection. So now comes what is that? The divine can give protection only to those who are wholeheartedly faithful to the divine, who live truly in the spirit of sadhana and keep their consciousness and preoccupation fixed upon the divine and the service of the divine. Desire, for example, insistence on one's likes and conveniences, all movements of hypocrisy and insincerity and falsehood are great obstacles standing in the way of the divine's protection. So, if you remember Sri Aurobindo's text, in the hour of God, he says, cleanse thy soul of all self-deceit and vain self-flattering, that thou mayest look straight into thy spirit and hear that which summons it. And then he says, if somebody lives like this, even if he fall, he shall rise again. Even if he seem to pass on the wings of the wind, he shall return, because of this sincerity. And it's in the same direction what she says here. Desire, insistence on one's likes and conveniences, all movements of hypocrisy and insincerity and falsehood are great obstacles standing in the way of the divine's protection. If you seek to impose your will upon the divine, it is as if you were calling for a bomb to fall upon you. I do not say that these things are bound to happen in this way, but they are very likely to happen if people do not become conscious and strictly vigilant and act in the true spirit of a spiritual seeker. If the psychological atmosphere remains the same as that of the outside world, there can be no wall of security against the dark forces that are working out in it. The ordeal of danger, suffering and destruction entering here. So this was in the context of the protection within the ashram, but we take it generally as the sense of the protection that we have to hold with us, around us, in everything that follows. And so these are the conditions, she says, which are psychological conditions which demand fulfillment. So I think we will hold this in our aspiration as a direction to make an effort. Remember, it's not that you have to become perfect in all this, free of hypocrisy, insincerity, falsehood. Certainly, at least you don't deceive yourself, but you don't have to be perfect in everything else in terms of being free from desires or being perfectly vigilant, etc. Yes, you do your best. The fact that you make the effort and grow in that direction already opens the way for the help to be already acting in you, around you, and supporting you and helping you in your effort itself. So this should be our immediate focus. Make the best effort that you can, whatever it is. Don't sit in judgment over whether it's good enough. Do the best that you're able to. That sincerity of the best that you can at this moment is good enough. And then that capacity will grow, and trust that you will be helped. We'll take a moment to concentrate in this aspiration. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you.